My parents were Canadian. My father born near Montreal, St. Anne de Bellevue. My mother was born in Fredericton of this province. She had just graduated from UNB and her father had sent her over to Germany. This was the fashion, very much so, in the beginning of the century, where she wanted to study music and voice, or piano and voice. My father had gone to McGill and then graduated and was at the University of Leipzig studying for a PhD in bacteriology. And so they met in 1914, I guess it was, or near the beginning of the war. My mother took a trip down the Rhine just to see that river, and fortunately the boat went beyond Germany and into Holland, I think it was. But my father stayed a little late in Leipzig in order to have his orals for his PhD. He had to dress up, of course, and go call around to the houses and homes of the various professors. Well, he was detained by the Germans because the war broke out, and he was interned for 4.5 years at the Ruhleben prison camp, which was a takeover of a racetrack near Berlin. He also made a good friend there who was a maritimer, Winthrop Pickard Bell, who was there for a few years and remained a good friend after the war. But my mother, of course, got to England and then got a boat home. So it was when the war was over and my father came back to Canada. He, I guess, had proposed to my mother, so he came to Fredericton to be married, where of course she was teaching piano and going to New York every once in a while for voice lessons. He arrived in Fredericton, and the Fredericton Gleaner got covering this romantic return and wedding, and the headline in the paper was "Romance Ends in Fredericton." Well, my father could never recover from that. He laughed so much. And so then I was born in 1922 and in Guelph, Ontario, where my father was a scientist working for the powdered milk company called Klim. He was there for a year or two, and my mother was sorry that I hadn't been born in Fredericton, so she whisked me off at, I don't know, this big, to Fredericton on the train, where I was christened. So in the St. Paul's Church, I think it is, in Fredericton. And so then they moved back to Ontario, of course, and she did. And in a couple of years, my father was appointed to a job in the Federal Department of Agriculture, where he was head of the bacteriology division and so on, at the experimental farm in Ottawa. And so we began our lives there, renting houses, and I wasn't involved in the rents or anything, and then building a house, which was funded by my grandfather, Mr. Van Wart from Fredericton. So I grew up in Ottawa and attended the various schools there, right up through high school. Glebe Collegiate was one of the final place where I was, and then I went off to McGill to take pre-med in the form of a BA, with the idea that I'd move on to medicine. But the war, of course, was on, and I decided that I wasn't sure about medicine, and I think for the good of humanity, I went into the army. And a lot of my friends did in various ways in the Air Force. And the Air Force, I thought I'd like to go in, join it, but they ruled me out on the basis of I couldn't distinguish between green and blue. Well, 6 months later, if I had taken the same test, they would have enrolled me and I would have been off flying. But I was just as happy, so I graduated from McGill and went into the Army. Now that was 1943. I'd been a Army cadet for 2 or 3 years before that, so I knew some of the basics of the Army, like stamping your feet and saluting and all that sort of thing. And so my idea was props medicine, but I wasn't just sure. So I went into the Army and I was put in the artillery and sent off to a place called Brockville, where I took the officer training for 3 months, and then I was sent to, I forget now, to Petawawa, I guess it was. This is some years ago. And then at Petawawa, they were impressed by, in some way, I don't know, with what I was doing, so they sent me off to a battle school in Vernon, BC, to get the training and come back and train artillery officers in basics of infantry. When I was at Vernon, which the camp there had a sign over its main gate, and it read, "Abandon hope, all ye who enter here." It was a very strict training and so on. But before I'd quite finished, the invasion of the continent had started, and it was at D-Day. So I wasn't getting anywhere in the artillery as far as getting towards Europe. So I switched to the infantry. Of course, I was immediately sent back to Brockville to take the same course I'd already had twice. See, they overtrained, and so in order to look after those they'd trained, because there was another batch coming along, you had to go back and repeat and all this. So I was completely 9 months pregnant by the time I got through Brockville itself. Three-term sessions there. I got to know Brockville very well. But fortunately, it was fairly close to Ottawa, so I could get home the odd time. And so I did that, and then finally I managed to get on a troop ship and go to Europe. There's nothing really exciting. I didn't get to the continent because I did more special training, and then I was in a special force which was guarding the shores of Britain, because they thought there might be landings by the Germans on the south coast of England. It was quite strenuous training, but I'd had the battle school experience, and therefore it was all right. But then the war ended, so then they called for volunteers to go to the Far East, but you had to volunteer all over again. Mackenzie King insisted that he wasn't going to compel anybody to go from Europe, say, to the Far East. So I enlisted and volunteered, came back right away on a troop ship. Well, there's some funny memories of the people greeting us at the province of Quebec, at the city of Quebec, the first troop ship into Quebec City. They, when we got off the boat the morning after we arrived, handed us a bag full of a package of cigarettes and some gum and some candies. And then as well, now this is 8:30 in the morning, I'm carrying my bag and my rifle. I'm handed an ice cream cone, and of course it melted all down my my sleeve and into my uniform, and this, and we all had these ice cream cones marching along to get a troop train to Montreal, I think it was, or something. So anyway, I was all on my way from, when I had a short leave, I was to go to Fort Benning, Georgia, for training in paratroops. I was very happy to hear that the war in the East had ended too. I was immediately discharged, and so then it was a question of settling down and going back to university. So I went to McGill with a friend of mine who had gone in the Navy. After he had done his pre-med, he was my best friend I know in Ottawa, and we met again. I remember we were both accepted to medicine at McGill. Well, he stayed on, and I decided, no, I want to be with books. So I went to the University of Toronto. I took an MA there in English, and then to McGill for a library training. So that was very fine, and from then on I moved to various libraries. I became librarian of the University of Victoria. It was then called Victoria College. But after a year there, I decided I better try and move east. So I applied for a job at Cornell in the library there, and was accepted by the director of the library who had graduated from McGill. So I went there and put in a year or so in Ithaca, New York, and then I was asked to apply for a job at Dalhousie. I guess people were scarce then. They invited you to apply rather than, and so I went to Dalhousie and spent 6 or 7 years there, I think, as head of the libraries, both the medical, the law. The medical people didn't like this appointment, but it was the president of the university whose plan this was. The law people didn't like that idea too, but we gradually weaned them over. And, so then I was invited to go to the York University by Murray Ross, who was the first president there. He had maritime connections, I guess, and so I went to York. I think that was in 1963 or so. I had a great time starting a library with no books at all. So I would visit various book shops, or both in England and Scotland and in Canada. So with some book dealers who I had a lot of experience with and knew well, I would simply say, please send any book you would find on sociology, psychology, and so on. And see, so these great boxes of books would be arriving, which I hadn't chosen. So we got these collections growing, and this was at the beginning of Trent University and Massey College. And I went to they wanted me to go to Trent. And so I went to a reception there and met Robertson Davies, who was the new master at Massey College, just starting. So we had a chat, and then he invited me for lunch the next day with his wife and so on. And I was offered the job at Massey College. So I packed my bags again and arrived there, and that was the most satisfying and happy job I think I've ever had, mainly because it was a small number of people were involved. Right? Davies couldn't have done more for me in arranging monies or doing anything at all like that. And the bursar and I were good pals, and I hooked up with the librarian of the University of Toronto, the two of us would, I would often buy books on behalf of their English department and so on, as well as of Massey College. And we decided that at Massey we would not cover all subjects, but cover anything having to do with the history of the book. It had to do with printing rather, and also the making of paper and so on, and anything related to the physical book and what was in the book itself, because anybody at Massey also had access to the University of Toronto Library. That was when in the first year of the Massey College setup, I heard about a printing press, a flatbed press. So I bought it. It was greeted with some astonishment by the college people, but except Rob Davies, he'd been printing and he was a publisher and so on of newspapers, and he was all for it. So we set up this sort of printing establishment there, and I gave all the courses in bibliography for PhDs and MAs. And so I'd have classes at the Massey Library of 60 to 80 students, and they had to come and take this course of mine, and that was good because I met a lot of the graduate students. And then based on that, I was involved not only in teaching the history of the book and bibliography, but also I was made a full professor at the English department at the University of Toronto. So I had the Massey College work and the University of Toronto work. And it was most interesting. It really was. And the library just, I would say, grew up according to the somewhat narrow specialties that we decided upon. But I had a lot of fun with the printing press because we called it the Massey College Press, and we did little productions of Christmas cards and various other important publications. And the students would be involved. Some of the graduate students would be part of that. And it also became, the college, a center for local designers, type designers, and one of them, Carl Dair, D-A-I-R, was very happy about the press, and he had designed the first Canadian typeface called Cartier. Carl became a good friend of mine, and he was most interested in what we were trying to do, and he left all his papers, which were very considerable, having to do with typography, and he left them to the library. So it was a happy development there, because I met all of many of the local designers, Alan Fleming and Jerry Moses. Well, they just went on and on. And we had a little club that met once a month in the Massey College common room, and we all had drinks and even talked about type and so on. And also printed some things. So then in 1975, I was asked to consider coming to Mount Allison as head of Canadian Studies. Yes, that was 1975. And my wife was in poor health. Fortunately for our move, this became a very fine town to be involved with, say, someone who's not able to walk and all this sort of thing, and who is in ill health, and then gradually she became she went into the Drew, and she was there for a number of years before she passed away. So that all developed in a way, although I miss very much Robertson Davies and and the company of the people who were there, 2 or 3 of them, still get in touch with me. So that was my move to New Brunswick. There was also that sentimental interest through my wife, my wife in Cape Breton, but my mother from Fredericton was the center of the universe, so she was concerned. and we traveled to Fredericton from Ottawa every summer, my brother and me, and we would go down to St. John Harbor and where we had there was a cottage there for us, and it was a wonderful upbringing. So when people say, "Where were you brought up?" I always say Ottawa and the Maritimes, because it was that. In fact, we just waited to get on the train, CPR train, coming down to this part of the world. I think we got off the train at Faribault, and then took a car to this cottage near the end of the shoreline of the St. John Harbor. So it was really nice, woodsy, and all that sort of thing. It was and a nice beach. It was called McLaren's Beach, and then McLaren's had a nice little store, or at least shed or whatever, and you could get ice cream there. And that was a daily mission by my brother and me and my cousin Jack Van Oort, who was also there. And we feasted at McLaren's. and Manchester's. That's another St. John name, I think. And they Manchester's Beach as well. So it was very good. And the question of landscape, I've just been part of it. I think coming right from my father's connection with the experimental farm and the great arboretum which is attached to it, where I used to go and bird watch all the time, and with a friend, Tom Stewart from Ottawa. We covered that area pretty thoroughly. I don't know whether the birds appreciated it or not. That gave me some confidence in working with something called the landscape, whether it's the landscape of one's own life or in the land of trees and leaves and grasses and so on. The experimental farm was a wonderful place in those days. I don't know what it's like now. My brother was very much the same, because he did a lot of painting of trees and rivers and clouds and skies and everything else. The close link between poetry and painting and the visual arts is there. It's very, very much a part of the same landscape, whether it's expressed in words through poetry or through paint, oils, or whatever. It's the same sort of expression and relationship. As far as the local land around here, the marshes, what I like about them, and I've often asked myself, well, why are you here? Why? I'm there at least once a day, even now. I drive my car, and I don't get out, but I drive it around along the edges and so on. I find that the great sky, the great expanse of the sky that's available to you, the long green reach of grasses and corn and everything else that's there, and I just find it a necessary part of my life. I think it became obvious in my book High Marsh Road. I found that it helped me, well, use it as a frame around my various thoughts, which were put down in sort of diary-like form in short lines and long lines in the High Marsh Road poem. So it hit me immediately. I was here. It was a place I just wanted to escape to right off the bat, but also I wanted it to be a continuing thing, which it has been. I don't know. I think when I pass out, I think the hearse better take me across the High Marsh Road. As far as the style of the poems are concerned, yes, there have been a lot of long poems. There have been short stands too, and the long poems are just my way of thinking now. And although it's at my age, it's hard to stay with even reading a book or writing anything of any duration. But I do it in short spurts, and they're always meant to be on a theme and linked together, whether they're short lines or long lines. And I like to think of the poetry I turn out as long poems, whether it's a haiku series or not, but particularly more like High Marsh Road.